Ready Player One is directed by Steven Spielberg, and this is the adaptation of the Ernest Cline novel of the same name. And this film follows a young man named Wade Watts who lives in this dystopian world that is preoccupied with this hyper-realistic virtual reality world known as the Oasis. But when the creator of the Oasis dies, he releases a video in which he challenges all of the users to find this hidden Easter egg, which will give the finder control of his company and his entire fortune. When it comes to book to film adaptations, more oftentimes than not, I'm actually behind the curve on actually reading the book before I go out and see the movie. However, Ready Player One is one of those rare instances where I actually have read the book. I actually read it when I was like a sophomore in high school. But even when I read the book then, I really wasn't that big of a fan of it. I didn't really care for the characters, and I thought it had the chic of this 80s nostalgia over this very run-of-the-mill dystopian YA novel. But there were elements about that book that I did enjoy, mainly the message that it had and the overall questions that it does ask. But if there is someone that is going to get me excited for this movie, it's going to be freaking Steven Spielberg, the man who is actually responsible for a lot of this 80s nostalgia that we feel. But thankfully, with the movie Ready Player One, for at least myself, it took a lot of the issues that I had with the book and it improved upon them. In the book, these characters have to go through these challenges in order to receive the next clue to this puzzle, and I thought that the challenges were the most egregious uses of the nostalgia in the 80s pop culture, and I just found it very irritating and very lazy. But in this film, Spielberg is able to craft such visceral action set pieces that are far and away superior to those in the book. I thoroughly enjoyed every single challenge that these characters have to go through in order to receive these keys, and I think that Spielberg really is the star of this film. The way he is able to choreograph these epic battles and these visceral action set pieces, it's almost this beautiful dance that really blew me away. And I think if somebody who has problems with this book leaving this film, the main problem that they're probably going to have with it is the fact this entire movie is an incredibly large love letter to 80s nostalgia. The fact that in this video game, as an avatar, you can choose any character in pop culture that you want to portray as. And I think when this nostalgia is utilized well is when, as an audience member, you can look around the screen and see these things that you recognize, but the film doesn't always draw attention to it. A perfect example of this being in the background of one of these characters' workshops, you can see the ship from Cowboy Bebop. Nobody says anything about it, it's just there. However, when this film falters is when it draws attention to those references in a way that I thought was really unnecessary. When this film is essentially just sitting the audience down and listing things that we may or may not recognize, I thought that there were a handful of scenes in this movie that really used this poorly. But more oftentimes than not, I would say that this movie is very tasteful on how it utilizes these references, because there are dozens of references happening in this movie at one time, but most of the time it doesn't draw attention to itself. As I said, I think it's this very sincere embrace of pop culture, a love letter to things that we have enjoyed for decades. I think there are a lot of uses of nostalgia in modern day films that kind of just cash in a very cynical way on this iconography of things that we love as fans. I think the way that this film succeeds is that when you watch this film, you can understand that there is more going on than just, hey, I happen to recognize that thing. There are more elements of this movie that you could enjoy. References are a big part of Ready Player One, but it's not the entirety of Ready Player One. It's more of just icing on the cake. But at the center of this film, you have a pretty fun ride in a world that I really enjoyed. I thought that the leads of this film are pretty good. Ty Sheridan portrays Wade Watts, and I think what he is given to work with, he does a pretty fine job. Most of his time in this film is utilized as this avatar, in which he does the voice acting for as well as the motion capture performance for. Spielberg has also utilized this technology in The Adventures of Tintin as well as the BFG, and I think that the performances in question aren't really what I have an issue with. It's more the characters that they are portraying, which I do feel leave a bit more to be desired. I thought the best characters in this film were Artemis, a friend that Wade has in the Oasis, who is portrayed by Olivia Cooke, who I also was a big fan of in this year's Thoroughbreds. I also thought that the Oasis's creator, James Halliday, who is portrayed by Mark Rylance, is another standout. And not only are the actors who are portraying these characters incredibly talented in their own right, but these two characters feel significantly more fleshed out, and I feel like are given a fair amount of layers and motivations to their actions. I do think it's worth pointing out, though, that Mark Rylance's performance in this film is eerily similar to Garth in Wayne's World. It's not a bad thing, but I dare you to go and see this movie and not notice that. I also really enjoyed the score of this film, which is done by Alan Silvestri as opposed to John Williams, who is the typical composer for Spielberg films. He was actually working on The Last Jedi at this time, so he couldn't do this film. But with that in mind, I could not think of a better fit for this movie than Silvestri, who has actually done the Back to the Future score, as well as Predator and Forrest Gump. His work in this movie is fantastic. It's one of the strongest elements of this film, actually, is how damn good this score is. He really impressed me with the amount of prowess he is able to put on display here. Ready Player One is a film that, because of the fact that a majority of this movie is inside this digital world, there is an immense reliance on heavy CGI, which I think is one of the greatest achievements of this film, is how good this movie looks. The fact that they're able to utilize these effects to their advantage and give us a world that doesn't necessarily feel real, but it feels exciting. And in regards to the special effects in this movie, I don't think that they were going for that, to make this movie look like it's an actual world. This movie wholly looks like a video game. However, in some of these close-ups of these avatars, you can see the texture of their skin, and just the detail is fantastic. As far as the design of these characters go, I think that Parzival, as well as Artemis and all the other Gunters, it's totally fine. It's totally serviceable. I don't think that any of them are outstanding. However, Ben Mendelsohn, who is also really good in this film, his avatar is this hulking boss, because he's the boss of this evil corporation, and his avatar is so badass. He's this very 1950s kind of caricature of what a boss looks like. In fact, he reminded me of Alex Ross's design of Superman. It's so cool. It's so intimidating. I loved his character in this film. Mendelsohn's performance in this movie is almost identical to what it was in Rogue One as Orson Krennic, which isn't a bad thing. It's just pretty pitch perfect casting. I would say that the biggest issue that I have with Ready Player One is how it establishes the real world. The film opens with some narration where Wade just kind of tells us what is going on and what the Oasis is, which I didn't think was too necessary. And they show us these stacks, which are essentially these trailers that are stacked up on one another. And that's pretty much all it shows us of the real world. But the film claims that the entire world is in chaos, essentially. It's this incredible dystopia, and the world has just kind of gone to shit. And that these people use the Oasis as an avenue to escape from their everyday lives because things are so bad. Except I don't think that this movie really does a good job of establishing how bad things have actually gotten. But watching the movie, it doesn't look like the world is awesome, but it doesn't necessarily look like everybody should give up hope and that there's no reason to even try anymore. Especially in a runtime of nearly 2.5 hours, I think this film could have done a better job at establishing how bad things have actually gotten. But overall, I would say that I don't think that there are too many elements of Ready Player One that I thought were magnificent. I think that this film has a lot of good components to it that come together to make a pretty fun and wild ride. I think this is a very enjoyable film that, like the novel it is based off of, has a nice message about embracing the reality that you're surrounded by, and it also serves as an interesting commentary of the very essence of nostalgia. This film has some truly electric action set pieces, and it is Spielberg in the truest sense of the word, and I think that those who are concerned about him and his directorial efforts going forward, because he's been doing very serious historical dramas recently, I hope that this is assuring them that the magic that Spielberg has is not even close to being gone. And even though this film does make a lot of changes to the book, I think if you are a fan of the book and you go out and see this movie, I think that there is a solid chance that you will like this movie as much, if not more, than the book itself. So did you guys see Ready Player One? What did you think about it? Leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you liked today's video, and if you did, you can click on the link down below and subscribe to my channel to see more movie reviews and movie related things. And guys, thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.